Hey leader, and welcome to episode number 311 of the L3 Leadership Podcast, where we are obsessed with helping you grow to your maximum potential and to maximize the impact of your leadership. My name is Doug Smith, and I am your host, and today's episode is brought to you by my friends at Bare Tongue Advisors. If you're new to the podcast, welcome. I'm so glad that you're here, and I hope that you'll enjoy our content and become a subscriber. Know that you can also watch all of our episodes on our YouTube channel, so make sure you're subscribed there as well. And if you've been listening to us for a while and the podcast has made an impact on your life, it would mean the world to me if you would leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whatever app you listen to podcasts through. That really does help us to grow our audience and reach more leaders, which is our whole mission here at L3 Leadership. So thank you in advance for that. Well, in today's episode, you'll hear an amazing conversation that I got to have with Paul Martinelli. If you're unfamiliar with Paul, let me just tell you a little bit about him. Paul grew up just outside of Pittsburgh, where he was raised with 3 other siblings by a single mom. He was raised in an abusive home. He struggled with a stuttering disability and ultimately became a high school dropout at the age of 16. Although his early years were tough, they're what gave him the fortitude he needed to push forward and become who he is today. And just a few years after leaving high school with only $200 in a used vacuum, he founded At Your Service Cleaning Company. This was the first business that he built into a multi-million-dollar business and ultimately sold, and he has since created and built multiple multi-million-dollar businesses, his latest being the co-founder of the John Maxwell team, a globally recognized public speaking and training organization with over 20,000 members. Now, Paul spends the majority of his time studying, teaching, and applying the principles of human potential, including leading the Empowered Living community, a social media following with more than 2.3 million people. He has shared the stage with such personal development masters such as John C. Maxwell, Seth Godin, Les Brown, Jack Canfield, Wayne Dyer, Brian Tracy, and so many more. And he offers courses, coaching, mastermind groups, and speaking engagements for groups and individuals seeking personal growth, business success, and overall fulfillment. And in our conversation, you'll hear Paul talk about how he overcame his childhood to do what he's doing today. You'll hear him share about what he learned from the book Think and Grow Rich, which is his favorite book of all time. You'll hear him share the lessons that he learned from giving Bob Proctor $300,000 to mentor him. And we talk about coaching, sales, and of course, we take him through the lightning round. You're going to love this interview. But before we get into it, just a few announcements. This episode of the L3 Leadership Podcast is sponsored by Bare Tongue Advisors. The financial advisors at Bare Tongue Advisors help educate and empower clients to make informed financial decisions. You can find out how Bare Tongue Advisors can help you develop a customized financial plan for your financial future by visiting their website at baretongueadvisors.com. That's BERATUNG advisors.com. Securities and investment products and services offered through LPL Financial, member FINRA and SIPC. Bare Tongue Advisors, LPL Financial, and L3 Leadership are separate entities. I also want to thank our sponsor, Henny Jewelers. They're a jeweler owned by my friend and mentor, John Henny. My wife, Laura, and I got our engagement and wedding rings through Henny Jewelers and had an amazing experience. And not only do they have great jewelry, but they also invest in people. In fact, for every couple that comes in engaged, they give them a book to help them prepare for marriage, and we just love that. So if you're in need of a good jeweler, check out hennyjewelers.com. And with all that being said, here's my conversation with Paul Martinelli. Well, hey, Paul, thank you so much for being willing to do this interview. And I just want to start off talking about the way you were raised. You were born here in Pittsburgh, same city that I'm from. And you have really interesting upbringing. You were raised by a single mom and were a high school dropout and ended up becoming an entrepreneur. Can you kind of give us an overview of your upbringing and that story?
Yeah, I can. And great to be with you and all your listeners. And congratulations on the success of the podcast. This is awesome. And anytime to help a fellow Pittsburgher, I mean, the guys from 412 have to stick together, right? So, I was, the home of my childhood was not a safe place to be. I grew up, with a single mom, but it was a violent home. We were physically, verbally, emotionally abused. And as a result of that, I developed a stutter. I stammer today, but when I was really young, it was really bad. And I didn't realize, Doug, how that would frame the first half of my life because of course, the speech impediment itself was a challenge. But what I didn't expect was the low self-image that it would cause me to create of myself, right? I mean, whenever we're picked on or teased and, we see ourselves kind of marginalized and diminished, it forms a self-concept that ties both to our self-image and our self-esteem. And so that really led me, because, you mentioned, I failed out of school. And what's interesting is, my brother Tom graduated from the University of Pittsburgh with a degree in microbiology. My brother David graduated from Carnegie Mellon University with a PhD in engineering. My sister Jeannie graduated #1 out of Allegheny College in Meadville in nursing. And so, I come from good stock. And for most of us, we were programmed to believe that kind of our DNA and our environment really form who we are. But really, it's our self-concept, our self-belief. And so I was always, though, an entrepreneur. I started my first official business, I guess, when I was 22, a cleaning business. But I was always that kid in Pittsburgh. And let's face it, Pittsburgh's one of those cities where if you're willing to hustle as a kid, you can make a buck, right? I could shovel snow, I could rake leaves, I could cut grass, I could collect bottles. I sold peanuts in the Strip District downtown. So, I think we grew up poor as well. And so I think in that environment, the uncertainty of my own kind of safety emotionally and physically, and the poverty, poverty teaches you something prosperity never will. It teaches you a level of self-reliance and hustle if you allow it to. And so that's what really formed me into an entrepreneur.
Wow. And so did you have self-confidence when you started your cleaning business at 22? For those who don't know, my understanding is you scaled that to be a multi-million-dollar business that actually you ended up selling. Did you just have confidence in your ability to be an entrepreneur? How did you grow in that journey?
I had confidence in my ability to go door to door, because going door to door to shovel snow, really, because, when I started my business, I had $200 in a dream. Right? I bought a used vacuum cleaner. I bought some Pledge, some Windex, and I went door to door, businesses asking if I could, be their janitor at night. And really, my confidence was so low. It's why I started a cleaning company. I figured, any dummy could clean a toilet, and I was any dummy. And I didn't have hopes and dreams of becoming Mr. Clean. That wasn't. I just needed to make a few bucks. And I remember in the South Side where I lived when I was 17 and 18. I was cleaning bars on Sarah Street and East Carson Street late at night. And so I knew that service existed. And so, necessity pushed me in that direction. I would begin to gain confidence when I had my first mentor. I was 24 years old when my life changed. I was 22, 1988, when I started the cleaning company in South Florida. And one day when I was out cold calling to build my business, when I was in a place, Doug, of just struggle, like most entrepreneurs, I was on that wheel where, you hire somebody and somebody quits, you get a new account and another account quits, I was making probably $17,000 to $20,000 a year. And I walked into a guy's business who was, he probably was worth $100 million. His father was the chief legal tax accountant for Exxon Corporation. At that time, was the largest company in the world. He was a retired municipal bonds trader on Wall Street. His brother ran the trading desk at Shearson Lehman Brothers. And he pulled off a book from behind him, the book Think and Grow Rich. And he took me through that book, word by word, sentence by sentence, paragraph by paragraph, page by page, chapter by chapter, for the better part of 3 years. And in Think and Grow Rich, in the chapter on desire, it's the second chapter in the book, there's a formula. It's a six-step formula to building self-confidence, which is really, it's a goal-setting process, but by having a goal, it develops confidence. And that's really where I think my confidence and certainty began to grow as an entrepreneur.
Yeah. I know you've talked about Think and Grow Rich all the time. For those who haven't read it, what would you say are the top 3 takeaways for you that have impacted your life from the book?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. He says, he makes a promise in the book. He says that there's a secret in the book. And that if you can find the secret, you can have anything you want. And I think if you look at it, Napoleon Hill, I've got a shirt here that says Hill, Allen, Maltz, and it goes on to say Waddles, that's the science of getting rich, and Troward, Thomas Troward. But Napoleon Hill studied the lives of 25,000 people, 500 of which were like the most successful: Edison, Ford, Rockefeller, Alexander Graham Bell, Carnegie, who, we've all been beneficiaries of Carnegie's work, and certainly in Pittsburgh. And he says at the end of this 20-year study, he writes the book Think and Grow Rich. And there's a chapter in Specialized Knowledge where he says he came to the conclusion that it wasn't an abundance of generalized or even specialized knowledge that led these people to great success and achievement. It's that they had developed their intellectual faculties to such a degree that they could create, manifest, or attract anything they wanted in their lives. And I thought, hold it. So I don't have to be smart. See, because I was programmed my whole life that, you're not going to get ahead unless you go to college. And, that ended for me in 10th grade, that dream. I was never going to go to college. And so I realized, most people don't even know what we know what our five senses are. We know all about our physical side, but we don't know much about, who we are as spiritual beings or much about our intellect. And so I didn't know what these 6 intellectual faculties are. And so I think the fact that there was this process that there were resources already within me, intuition, imagination, perception, reason, the will, the ability to focus, these intellectual faculties, all I had to do was develop these, right? And so I think that was one, was that there was this promise. I think the second thing that really hit me is in chapter 9, the chapter on decision, where he said, after studying all these people's lives, he came to the conclusion that successful people had a habit around decision making. He said that they made decisions very quickly, and they seldom, if ever, changed those decisions. In other words, they didn't take an opinion poll, right? And they didn't wait for conditions and circumstances to change. When an idea came to them, they asked themselves one question: if I act on this idea, will it move me in the direction of my dream? I don't need to know how. I don't need to know where everything's going to come from. I have to start. And so that really helped me. So many entrepreneurs wait to start their website, wait to launch, wait for everything to be perfect. But if you look at one of the largest companies in the world, arguably Apple, it was the first to $1 trillion. They launch one of these things every 2 or 3 years?
Every year.
Yeah. When they know it's going to fail, right? They launch it knowing they're not ready, and people line up for a week waiting to buy it, and they know they know it's not ready. They don't wait to be ready. They launch and they fix. I mean, that's the genius of Jobs, right? Steve Jobs was like, "We're going," right? And then I think lastly, the third thing was, it's a chapter that most people don't read or understand. It's the chapter on the transmutation of sexual energy. And basically what he was saying is especially for men, but not only men, but so many people leading into their early 50s waste so much of their energy. They're just creative energy. If you think about sexual energy, don't forget about the act of sex. It's just the creative energy. They waste so much of this creative energy chasing things that don't matter, that are not in harmony with their purpose, that lead to nothing. And I think what that did was it woke me up. It really woke me up to realize, every day I have to make decisions, and these decisions have consequences in my life.
You talked a lot about, you build and scale in your lifetime multiple multi-million-dollar businesses. You talked about advice for entrepreneurs is a lot of times just start knowing that you're willing to fail. I'm curious, speaking to entrepreneurs who may have a similar dream of, hey, I want to build a business, whether it's a cleaning business, a speaking business, a coaching business. For those who want to scale, what other things and advice would you give them as they start their journey, or if they're in the middle of it?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. Is that you have to have. I think it was Drucker who said, "Fail fast, fail first, fail often." Right? You have to suspend the requirement of knowing how things are going to work. We don't know how to do anything, right? We don't know how to do anything. We really don't. I mean, like I couldn't tell you how I could stand up, and I'm a professional stander-upper. I mean, I've been standing up for 55 years. But what we do is we do something, and then we tell you what we did, right? So you've got to kind of have this just personal self-fortitude that you're willing to take a risk. And what most entrepreneurs are risk adverse. And I believe that risk is a myth. There's no such thing as risk. Risk is just a perception of our lack of resourcefulness. And the moment we become aware that we're resourced, the risk disappears. Like, think about it. When a young child, wants to ride a bike, it's risky. They could fall, they could chip their teeth, scratch their knee, break their arm. And so they're afraid to get on that bike. But as soon as somebody who's at a higher level of awareness comes alongside them, and I know you do this work in your mastermind groups, where a group of people create a collective consciousness, a collective level of awareness, and all transformation begins in awareness. When that child gets somebody who has a higher level of awareness of the principles needed to ride the bicycle, in this case, hand-eye coordination, muscle dexterity, balance, when they introduce those principles to the child's awareness and fortify that with belief, all of a sudden their perception of their own internal resources increases. They realize, hold it, maybe I really can do this. That's how belief starts. Then they begin to test it. They act on the borrowed belief of another person. And by the end of the day, it's like, look, Mom, no hands. And all of a sudden, what was risky at 8 o'clock in the morning is no longer a risk. It's the same activity, but the myth of risk has been changed by the awareness of the resources within you. And here's a universal law that is absolutely true. It's based on the law of perpetual transmutation of energy. And it tells us that it would be universally impossible. The universe would collapse. It's kind of like, if the sun if the sun rises on the West Coast, it's a bad day for all of us, right? We got bigger problems. So one of the universal laws is that you would not be able to form the conception of an idea. Think about this. You would not be able to form the conception of an idea. So whatever idea that you can conceive in your mind, as soon as you can conceive it, you are instantly and automatically connected to all the resources in the universe necessary for its fulfillment. Now, that doesn't mean you won't fail. That doesn't mean it won't be easy. That also doesn't mean that you'll know how to access those resources. But what it does tell you is that that idea you have is not is not just an idea of some future. It's an emerging future. It's a reflection of your potential. It's saying you can do this. When Edison had had the idea here for the light bulb, he had all the resources necessary to do it. Same with Jarvik with the heart, right? Same with the Wright brothers. The Wright brothers didn't have a pilot's license, right? All they had was the blueprint in their mind, and they accessed resources the Wright brothers didn't make something out of nothing. Everything that was necessary for flight was already here. All the laws that governed space flight was already here. All they did was they expanded their awareness of their resourcefulness to tap into more ideas. And so this is the point, Doug. Who you listen to matters. Stop asking the plumber and the dentist for financial advice. Stop asking people who've never built anything, who've never risked anything, who've never created what it is that you want to create, what they think. Chances are they don't think. They certainly don't think the way you think. God gave you the idea. God entrusted you this precious idea, and it's now for you to bring that forward. That's what desire is. Desire is the effort of an unexpressed possibility within you seeking to be birthed through you. Desire, to give birth to. That's what it means.
So I've heard you say multiple times in hearing you speak that, and I may word this wrong, but you say, I'll never agree with your limitations or someone's limitations. Is that the quote?
Absolutely. I will never make an agreement with somebody's limitations. Never.
And I'm assuming what you just explained is why, because limitations are not a reality. Yeah.
I also won't argue. I also won't argue with you about gravity.
Let's go.
It's a law.
Yeah. So when you talked about Think and Grow Rich, clearly it's impacted you. You had that meeting with your mentor, changed your life forever, and then you got really interested in personal development. And my understanding, again, is that we just lost Bob Proctor recently. I know he made a huge impact on your life, but he had impacted you somehow, and you actually paid him, I believe, $300,000 to train you and teach you how to be a speaker, leader, et cetera. Can you talk about that and shift that into the importance of investing in yourself? I'm really fascinated because, I'm sure that fast-tracked you versus everyone else who's paying $25 for his book, et cetera. Can you talk about that experience?
Yeah, well, in 1988, when Patrick Hayes gives me the book Think and Grow Rich, he introduces me to a program called Born Rich by Bob Proctor that Bob had just created. It was a video series, and I watched that, and I watched it for years. And then I had an opportunity to meet Bob. And I was, by this time I had become a multi-millionaire. My cleaning business was very big. And I had a desire to start speaking and training people on how I had transformed my life. When you see a good movie, you want to share it with other people. When you go to a good restaurant, you want to share it with other people. I can't tell you the number of books, Think and Grow Rich books I bought. I bought, everybody a book. I turned into an evangelist for the book. But the interesting thing is that most of the people I gave the book to, nothing changed in their life. But then again, they never read it and they were never mentored. So I understood the power of mentorship. So I had an opportunity to meet Bob, and Bob asked me, he gave me a proposal. He said, look, why don't you sell your cleaning business, pay me $300,000. You can buy into my company and I'll mentor you. You want to be a coach and speaker? He said, look, in about 10 years, you'll be pretty big in Florida, or I can put you on the world stage. And so I sold the company. And when I sold it, it was the largest sale of an independently owned cleaning company in the Southeast United States. I paid Bob $300,000. And for the next 4 years, I was business partners with Bob. What did that do? Well, I'm 56 years old right now. There are probably zero 56-year-old public speakers that shared the stage with Zig Ziglar 3 times, that shared the stage with Wayne Dyer, Dennis Waitley, Jack Canfield, Mark Victor Hansen, Brian Tracy, Les Brown. I was business partners with Les. I mean, I worked with all these guys. I was in the green room with them. I was in the back of the limousine. I was at the front of the plane. I was at restaurants at dinner with them. It opened a world to me that you could never get. It's how the first time I met John Maxwell, who I was partners with for the last 10 years and generated, I think John and I, our last business, we probably generated about $350 million in that one business. The first time I met John, I had hired John to come speak at a seminar Bob and I were doing. And so, proximity is power.
Come on.
Proximity is power. I will pay for front row. I will pay for access. There are times, and I have hired people for $25,000 for a day just to sit down with them, just to get answers to questions that I wanted to learn. I remember when I had my first opportunity to speak in an arena. If you're a public speaker, the first time you're at a church group, right? And maybe you're leading them in silent prayer, right?
Yeah.
Right. And then it grows from there, and it's smaller audiences. And then maybe you do, maybe you get to 12, and then it's 50, and then it's 100, and then maybe you get 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000. But this is the 15, 20,000 people in an arena. And I had never spoken in that kind of setting. And I had never sold from the stage in that kind of setting. And, the way these things work is, they hire, 6 speakers, General Schwarzkopf, or a retired president. There's like 6 people in the lineup, and you're one, and everybody gets up for an hour, and, it's kind of like a Peter Lowe seminar, everybody speaks for an hour, and, everybody makes a pitch. And I had never done it. And so I had hired somebody who had done it, and their fee was $25,000 for a couple of hours, and I paid it. I paid it twice. It twice because I wanted to learn. And I'll tell you what, it's priceless. That first day I sold $250,000 from the platform. So I mean, what an ROI, right? So it pays to buy knowledge. It pays to not buy knowledge. They say, experience is the best teacher, but truly it's evaluated experience. Yeah. And I don't have to have the experience. Somebody who wants to learn how to, create a number one, podcast should probably pay you to learn how to do that. I mean, because you know their next 100 mistakes.
So talk to me about proximity is power. You've had access to some of these, and it sounds like you paid your way in. Is that the only way to get in with some of these names, is to pay your way, or what other advice would you have to networking?
Yeah, no. You either have to pay your way in, or you have to go, carry the bags, right? open the doors,
Yeah.
Right? Servant leadership, right? Get in.
Yeah.
And you have to position yourself. You have to, like when I partnered with John Maxwell, I hired John, and then about 7 months later, I was having lunch with him. And when we had lunch, he didn't even remember me from the event that I hired him at. But I brought to John one idea. I said, you've got all this content, and you've got all these people who love it, and you don't license them to teach it. And many of them are teaching it, and they would gladly pay you to teach your content if they had some access to you and a teaching team you could put together. Let me build it for you. I'm not looking for a job. I want a partnership. And he said, yes, he saw it. And we partnered. 10 years later, we had the largest training company in the world. We've certified over 40,000 people in 162 countries, all who have paid between $3,000 and $5,000 to be licensed to teach his world's content. And here's the difference. Jim Rohn is dead. Zig Ziglar is dead. Wayne Dyer is dead. And so is all of their content. It's dead. When Bob Proctor is dead, and his content likely won't go on. When John Maxwell dies, there'll be 40, 50,000 people teaching his content through a sustainable model as an independent speaker, teacher, trainer, and coach. It's the same thing that I do with my content. I license people to teach my content. My teachings will go on and on well after I'm gone.
So good. So I got certified as a Maxwell coach, and I would just say that it was a world-class experience from beginning to end.
Thank you.
So 40,000 coaches. I think I was talking to Mark Cole once, and I was just like, hey, how many coaches actually do something, with the knowledge that they're given? And I'm just curious, I'm sure that whether it's the 20/80 rule, you saw coaches that took the material, ran with it, and they exploded. And then there's people that do nothing. I'm just curious, for people who are interested in getting into the speaking, coaching business, what advice would you have for them to actually, make a dent and actually make a name for themselves in that space?
Yeah. Manage your expectations. Look, here's a hint. Google's not going to hire you. Okay. Johnson & Johnson isn't going to hire you. Right. One of the best books I read, and I'm glad I read this years and years and years ago. Stanley, I believe is his last name. He wrote a book called The Millionaire Next Door. Changed my life because I realized, what you're looking for as a speaker is connect with that electrical contractor who's got, 27 trucks on the road, that they're all lettered because he cares about his brand. And he's got a really nice website, and all of his guys are uniformed. Find that dance studio, find that gymnasium, that gymnastics teacher that really takes pride in their business. They want to grow their teams, and they don't have the resources to hire a full-time trainer. And so manage your expectations. That would be the first thing. The second bit of advice is this. You don't have to be great to start, but you've got to start to be great. So, just start. Just start. Find one thing and focus on it. The shirt, Napoleon Hill, right? So these are the guys that
why isn't Martinelli on there, right?
That's right, because these are the guys I studied, right? Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich, James Allen, As a Man Thinketh, Maxwell Maltz, Psycho-Cybernetics, Wallace D. Waddell, Science of Getting Rich, Thomas Troward, any word he ever wrote is brilliant. And if you notice, what they all have in common is they're dead. Okay? And I say that, kind of tongue in cheek, but you got to remember, in 1991, when I was studying dead masters, everybody else was going to seminars with the giant, Anthony Robbins, learning how to walk on fire. I never did that. Right? Because I didn't have a big hot coal problem in my life. You know what I mean? I wasn't looking for that. And so, I focused on one thing. I mastered Think and Grow Rich. The last time I publicly taught it for free, I had over 50,000 people register for my course. 50,000 people register for my course the last time I taught it for free. Okay. But I've mastered it. I'm probably I'm arguably the top teacher in the world on its philosophy. Wow. And I focused on one thing. So here's my saying, get good first.
Yeah.
Get good first. Find one thing and master it. Master it. If it's leadership, great. If it's communication, great. If it's, how to build trust, great. If it's emotional intelligence, great. If it's diversity, equity, inclusion, great. Find one thing. Find one thing. Master it. And here's the last thing. You must be able to communicate and articulate and transfer your value to the marketplace. Nobody buys coaching. Nobody buys training. They have to be sold it. And so if you don't know how to sell, reach out to me. I've got probably one of the best sales training programs in the world. And if you don't reach out to me, reach out to somebody. If you don't have the skill of how to sell, if you don't know how to sell in this business, you're unemployed. I mean, because look, Les Brown doesn't have to sell himself now, right? His reputation sells himself. In the beginning, you're just trying to make your reputation. So you have to be able to communicate and articulate and then transfer your value to somebody else. And if you don't know how to do those things, I don't know that you're going to really be able to transfer, from your full-time job into being, a six-figure speaker.
Yeah. So talk about not just the selling your value. I know one thing everyone gets caught up on is pricing. Yep. So I want to talk to you about money as well, but what advice would you have when it comes to pricing your product and services?
Pricing is boiled down to one thing. Price is all determined on an exchange of value, full stop. Full stop. And so if you don't know your value, and if you don't know what the buyer values, you won't know your price. When somebody gets on the phone with me and says, I'm not sure how much I should charge for, my speaking engagement. I don't know how much I should charge for my coaching. What they're telling me is I don't know my value. Let me just ask you a real quick question, Doug. Would you go into any McDonald's today right now? I mean, this isn't a trick question, okay? But would you go into McDonald's right now and pay $20 for a hamburger? Yes or no? No. Would you go to Ruth Chris and sit down and pay $20 for a burger? Yes. What's the difference? There's burgers, right? Right? It's value, right? It's the experience.
Yes.
Right? It's the experience. And so this goes back to getting good first. And so price is all about your level of awareness of your value and your ability to uncover what the client values. And then the differential, the connecting point is the price of your service. Does it make sense?
Yeah. When you were here in Pittsburgh and we were all having dinner, I think I asked you the top 3 things that you learned from Bob, which I would love for you to reiterate now that we just lost him. But I think the first thing that the first thing you said was, unless Bob had a mic in his hand, he wasn't making money. And so that was an issue. Can you talk about that for those who are in the speaking and coaching, et cetera?
Yeah. I mean, you think about it, if you're, Les Brown, gets paid about $75,000 a speech. But if he's not speaking, he's unemployed. He doesn't have a business. When I met John Maxwell, John was basically an unemployed speaker and an unemployed author. I mean, unless he was writing a book, he was unemployed. He didn't have a business. Most of these older school, speakers, Brian Tracy, Brian Tracy's probably the one outlier. Brian Tracy's a pretty sharp business guy, so he's had businesses all along. But most of these guys, Les Brown really doesn't have a business. He doesn't have a machine. John now has a machine. Every single day, he's got people who are being certified. I have a machine every single day. I've got a full-time sales team that sells content, that sells training, that sells licensed content. It's a machine. It's a business. When I wake up every single day, I grab a report of how many people bought product overnight. We're generating thousands every single month on digital products. And so one of the things that I realize is that, you could be a great speaker or a great coach, but you're unemployed. So, one of the things that the cleaning company taught me was duplication. Once I sold the cleaning, contract to the dentist, their trash can kept getting full. The bathroom kept getting dirty. Good economy, bad economy, didn't matter, right? And so I had a reoccurring revenue stream from that. And so you have to recognize that if you're a coach or you're a speaker, you've got to build a sustainability, model that keeps you employed so that you can stay creative enough when you're not hired, because you could only have one gig in a month, and that's great if it pays you, $15,000, but after tax, what do you have?
Right.
You might as well go get a job where you get benefits.
We're talking about money. I would love to hear your advice on money. I heard one, you said you grew up in poverty, and that actually was a benefit to you. And then I think when we were at dinner, you also mentioned about, the money mindset of, you start thinking about money in hundreds, then you start to think about money in thousands, then millions, and then, beyond that.
Yeah.
From that journey from poverty to where you are now financially, what would you say the top 3 pieces of advice when it comes to money would be for people?
Number one is, we've created a culture, Doug. At the time of this recording, we just saw the State of the Union by President Biden. And I don't want to, this isn't politics. But if I hear pay my fair share one more time, I think I'd take a bridge. We have to stop demonizing the rich. You and I are benefactors of rich. In Pittsburgh, we have Carnegie Museum, Carnegie Science Center, Carnegie Library, Carnegie. It's called Carnegie because he endowed it. He funded it. You go to Silicon Valley and you go to the Zuckerberg Cancer Center. Wake up! Somebody wrote a check for that, right? So all these services that are provided to people in these, Phillips Park and all these Shenley Park. There was a family named Shenley, right? That's where Carnegie Mellon University. Where do you think the money came from, right? Yeah. And so we've got to stop demonizing the rich. See, one of the big things we have, the challenges we have about money is we have these competing commitments. So here it is, I want to get rich. 22 years old, I want to get rich. But my programming says is that rich people are bad. That the only way people get ahead is by, taking advantage of other people and doing bad things. That's not true. Well, do rich people do bad things? Sure. Are there good and bad? There's good and bad in everybody. But here's what I know is on the whole, rich people do a lot more, create a lot more value. If you really understand what money is, and just think about this for a second, money is an idea. That's all it is. It's an idea. It's an agreement that you have, I have, and the collective consciousness of the world have for value. When I pull out, when I pull out $100 bills, that's $100 bill no matter where I go in the world. Why? Because there's a collective agreement on the idea of what this is worth. Okay? Now, that $100 bill is exchanged for value. I can buy food, I can buy services, I can buy products with this. It's exchanged for value. In other words, if there's no value, all of a sudden this $100 bill turns into a $1 bill really quick, right? You're not going to pay $15 for a hamburger. Why? Because of the value. The collective consciousness doesn't match that. And so if we understand that if money is exchanged for value, and it only is, as a matter of fact, wherever there is deceit, wherever there is corruption, wherever there is bad mojo going on, the first thing to leave is money. That's the first thing. Ask the Venezuelans. The first time there's a problem, money goes away. It's the first to leave the party. It won't be around where there's deceit. Not for long. Bernie Madoff made lots of it. But as soon as his deceit showed up, what happened to the money? Disappeared. It's the first thing to leave. So if that's the case, then money is exchanged for value. And if you've got a lot of it, that must mean you provide a lot of value. And if you don't have a lot of it, maybe you're not providing a lot of value. And maybe it's time you take inventory of what you're doing with your life.
Well, Paul, I'd love to take a few minutes and take you through the lightning round. It's just a bunch of fun questions that I always ask leaders. And the first one is, if you could put a quote on a billboard for everyone to read, what would it say?
If you can conceive it, believe it, you can achieve it.
What's the best advice you've ever received, and who gave it to you?
Maxwell Maltz Psycho-Cybernetics in the book, where he said, you'll never outperform your own self-image. The image you hold of yourself, you reproduce again and again and again until you change it.
Best purchase you've made in the last year for $100 or less?
Best purchase I've made?
Yeah, for $100 or less.
There's a new kind of shoe called Allbirds that came out. And I bought a pair of Allbird shoes, and they're really good, really comfortable, great arch support.
You've talked about a few books throughout the course. I'm sure you would name Think and Grow Rich as the top book that's influenced you. Are there any others that come to mind that you'd want to share with our audience? As
a Man Thinketh by James Allen, Psycho-Cybernetics, and all of these are the original text. Don't go buying the ones that, other people kind of take in the book, right? So, don't buy Maxwell Maltz with, Dan Kennedy, right? So you want James Allen, published in 1910, As a Man Thinketh, Napoleon Hill, published in 1937, Think and Grow Rich, Maxwell Maltz in 1960, Psycho-Cybernetics, Science of Getting Rich by Wallace D. Wattles, I think was published in 1910.
Wow. You've gotten to spend time with some incredible leaders on the planet. I'm sure people would love to. I'm curious, when you get a lunch with a John Maxwell, do you have a go-to question or two that you always ask in those meetings?
I usually ask them what they're thinking about right now, because the historical achievements. I can go to Wikipedia. I want to know, right? I want to know, because these kinds of thinkers are on the bleeding edge, right? They're on the bleeding edge, and they've got access. I mean, John's got access to the Supreme Court, the presidents. I mean, he's, so I want to know what what are they thinking about right now? What are they, they can see around corners. What do you see coming? What do you see about where the world is going? I ask them to play the futurist.
So what does Paul Martinelli see right now?
Well, I think a lot of chaos right now. And I see a lot of dissension right now. And I'll be very honest, Doug, prior to COVID, I was on the road 2 or 3 weeks a month and traveling all over the world. And I've been more concerned about our country in the last 18 months than I've ever been in my life. I think that we are under assault on our freedoms and our democracy. And I think liberty is under attack. And I think, the quote that the only thing for evil to prevail is for good men to sit back and do nothing is screaming right now. And it scares me when I see what happens in Canada, and it's accepted. It's just really scary.
Yeah. What's your greatest leadership pet peeve?
Politicians who pass mask mandates and come to Florida. I live in Florida. So they all come to Florida and party on our beaches while their people are, locked down and masked, and they're all on our beaches, having cocktails and doing the limbo.
It's a good one.
Yeah.
You've gotten to travel all over the world. You can pretty much have any experience that you want. I'm curious, what's something you've done that you think everyone should experience in their lifetime?
Go to a Michelin, a 3-star Michelin restaurant.
Do you have a favorite?
Yeah, well, De La Brea is in Holland. It's the number 1 restaurant in the world. Malise in LA, on Santa Monica Boulevard, one of the best. Per se in Columbus Circle, New York.
Okay,
it's my goal to eat it. It's my goal to eat at all of them.
How many are there, and how far along in that goal are you?
About 165. I've been to 23.
Okay. Are you going to make it? You're going to hit them all?
I'm trying, man. You've got it. They're hard to get into. And so I've worked my leverage to be able to get into them. There's one in the DC called Bar by Chef Jose Andre, which is fabulous. He has one in the SLS in Beverly Hills called Bazaar, which is and Sami, which is unbelievable. And most of these only seat 10 people, right? Or 30 people. So they're hard to get into. They're $700 or $800 a person. With a wine pairing for dinner. But if you really, you owe it to yourself to just experience the best the world has to offer. It's a 3 or 4 hour meal and it's the best of everything, the best service, the best eating utensils, the best food, the best ingredients, the best presentation. It's spirit of opulence.
Well, you just added that to my bucket list. So I'll tell my wife we have 165 restaurants to hit.
That's right.
So I've been asking, I'm trying to change this question. I usually ask if you could have coffee with your 20-year-old self, what would you tell them? But I'm curious, is there an age that you wish you could go back to and have coffee with yourself at that age? Because if you would have intervened and told him something, that it would have made a significant impact. Yeah.
If I could go back to when I was, 22, 23 years old, when I was really in deep struggle, right? All of my demons were coming up because I was trying to break free from my old self, right? And so, as you're trying to break free, it's the caterpillar and the cocoon. It's a painful struggle of a process. And, as you move out of your comfort zone, out of the zone of your own knowing, every fear is realized. You have to break that boundary. The old you must die in order for the new you. Life is a fight for territory, Doug. Life is a fight for territory. And if I could go back to myself and say, it's going to be okay, and just give myself some peace that, all of this. Genevieve B. Rand wrote a book, Your Invisible Power. And she says in the first paragraph of the book, she says, when your understanding can grasp your power to visualize your heart's desire and hold it with your will, you will attract all things requisite for the fulfillment of that picture. She doesn't say all good things. In other words, all things are necessary. I was embezzled, in year 7 of my business. I've had people steal from me and cheat, and I've been deceived and I've been taken advantage of. And every single one of those, my motto is harvest the good. Harvest the good and go on. Your first loss is your best loss, right? Pick up your mat and go. That's what Jesus taught us to do. And I think it's probably singularly one of his best teachings, right? Just pick up your mat and go. You don't stay in the conditions and circumstances of your woundedness and brokenness and disability. Pick up your mat and go. You've been healed. So good. And then, you mentioned several times throughout the interview of heroes that you had that impacted your life that are dead. They're no longer here. And, the legacy that they left behind. I'm curious, at the end of your life, what do you want Paul Martinelli to be remembered for? You've made an impact on a lot of people. Well, thank you. That I walked my talk, right? That I lived the best version of my level of awareness of truth. Anything else you want to leave leaders with today? I think there's a massive responsibility, and I'll go as far as obligation that you carry. If you've been gifted the ability to have resources and the awareness of those resources to lead other people, whether it's children or adults, whether it's one person or whether it's millions, there's a responsibility, but there's also an obligation that you have. And I think you need to hold yourself to the highest standard of that commitment to that obligation and responsibility that it convicts you of every single day of your life. Wow. Well, thank you for living that out. Thank you for walking your talk. I've admired you from a distance and from afar for a long time, and it was a pleasure to get to meet you here a few months ago in Pittsburgh, and this conversation did not disappoint either. So thank you for adding value to me and everyone that are listening to this podcast. Paul, appreciate it. Thank you, Doug. Thank you all. Be well. Yeah.
Well, hey, leader, thank you so much for listening to my conversation with Paul. I hope that you enjoyed it as much as I did. You can find ways to connect with him and links to everything that we discussed in the show notes at l3leadership.org/311. And leader, as always, I want to challenge you that if you want to 10x your growth this year, then you need to either launch or join an L3 Leadership Mastermind Group. Mastermind groups have been the greatest source of growth in my life over the last 7 years. If you're unfamiliar with what they are, they're just groups of 6 to 12 leaders that meet together for at least 1 year on a consistent basis to help each other grow, hold each other accountable, achieve goals together, and to do life together. So if you're interested in learning more about masterminds, go to l3leadership.org/masterminds. And as always, I like to end with a quote, and I'll quote Dave Ramsey's today. He said this, he said, "Change hurts, but staying the same hurts even more." Well, leader, I hope you were encouraged by this episode. Know that Laura and I love you. We believe in you. Don't quit. Keep leading. The world needs your leadership. We'll talk to you next episode.